Okay, hello everyone. We are here today. I'm happy to see everyone. I hope everyone's staying healthy and safe. This right now we are going to have a presentation by one of our members, Zenell Brown. She recently authored a book that we are happy to present, and she is going to present on her own the actual what comes along with the book and the details and the substance of the book. So before that, I'm going to give you a brief bio on attorney Zenell Brown. Zenell Brown serves as the executive court administrator for the Third Circuit Court. She has been with the court since 1997 and has served in various capacities such as domestic relations specialist, attorney, and friend of the court, FOC. She developed the facilitative mediation department, created the FOC Library Outreach and Bench Warrant Amnesty Initiative. She also co-chairs the court's Diversity and Inclusion Project and is the 2019 recipient of the Michigan Association of Women Lawyers Geraldine Bledsoe Ford Award. She is a graduate of Wayne State Law School and University of Michigan, Detroit, with a bachelor's of arts. She enjoys travel with her husband and family. So with no further ado, I am going to present attorney Zenell Brown, an author.
Thank you, Rita. So glad to be here. Thank you, Black Women Lawyers Association of Michigan. Definitely, I'm honored to be in your presence. As Rita's basically said, I've been in the court scene, the legal community for about 22, 23 years. And this time, while we were closed in the house for COVID, I actually had the opportunity to write Coffee and Conversations, Inclusion and Belonging. And to share this with you, again, is an honor. It's basically a 28-minute read at the most. And it just basically touches on some of the things that I've experienced in my career as a woman of color, as an attorney of color. And then it tells you it's time to actually have a conversation. So hopefully you got your cup of coffee, your cup of tea, and your favorite mug, and we can have this conversation. So Coffee of Conversations, let me tell you a little bit about the substance of the book. First, it starts with an acknowledgement to my mother. And my mother, probably like so many other mothers out there, Black mothers, white mothers, mothers in particular, was very protective of me as a child growing up and my number one cheerleader. But I also realized that she was willing to go into spaces where she may have been the only woman of color to advocate for me to get the things that I needed. And most often that was in the educational arena. So about in eighth grade, my mother decided that the Detroit public school system was deteriorating. We lived in Highland Park at the time, that the Highland Park school system was deteriorating. And she decided, okay, we're going to venture out here into the private world of education without any money, working 3 jobs basically. She had me enroll in Bloomfield Hills Academy. And believe me, that was like an eye-opening experience to go from a predominantly Black school to a majority white school. And she was like my number one cheerleader. Oftentimes she would be in the room with people who she was probably out-educated by. Definitely they had more financial means than she did, but she made sure that I got what I needed from that school and was able to graduate, and to graduate early, as a matter of fact. So it starts off with an acknowledgement of who she is. And in my opinion, it's a tribute to every mother who puts her child's needs first and is willing to take a risk, willing to put herself out there and into the unknown to make sure her child has a future that's more promising than what she would have had. So it starts off there. And then I have definitely the dedication to my husband. Please pray for him as he's having a recovery from a health challenge right now. And the dedication to my girls and the rest of my family, those I work with. They're called the J team. And on the J team, there's Jesus, there's Jan, Jeanette, and Jelona. And those are the people who basically keep me together and make sure I can get from meeting to meeting. And then we go into the substance of it. Like I said, I started at the court about 20 years ago, and I started at the friend of the court. And I don't know how long you've been in practice, but the friend of the court had a lot of room for improvement when I started there. And that's being nice to the friend of the court. And basically, when I started, about the first week, I made up the decision that I was not going to stay at the friend of the court. It was just too crazy of a place to be. And one of the counters that I had was a person called, who I named Chuck in the book. And Chuck was an arrogant, white man, and he came over to me. I had recently passed the bar exam, had decided that I was going to work in Wayne County for a moment, and he came over to me and he introduced himself and said, well, I passed the bar exam too. I multi-stated. And I always looked at that as like, okay, that's a strange introduction. And what am I supposed to say to that? I don't know about how easy it was for anyone else to pass the bar exam, but I know I worked my butt off and I did not multi state. And I didn't feel as if it was something that I needed to have a conversation about because I got a P number just like he got a P number. So Chuck shared that information and I basically remained quiet, not knowing what to do with it. And then he went on his way for that day. Of course, he comes back later. And this time it's basically they're posting a position about friend of the court attorney. If you know the history of the friend of the court, a lot of the friend of the court attorneys were internal candidates. And most of the people who worked at the friend of the court were not people who looked like me. So most of the candidates who were getting these positions were basically people who were white, and some of them were white females. And definitely they had been around for a while. So Chuck found it was his responsibility to school me on how things worked regarding the promotions. And he basically shared with me what I shared with you. And I left with the impression that I need not apply. Of course, like I said, you always go back to mom. And it's like, not only will you apply, you will study, you will do what it takes to pass the exam. So that's exactly what I did. I doubled down on it. And one thing Chuck probably didn't know is that I had also worked previously in Oakland County as a friend of the court caseworker. I'm sorry, for the prosecutor's office in domestic relations, as a matter of fact. So we take the exam, we do the interview, then Chuck comes by again. And he comes by, all happy, go lucky. And he stops at my cubicle and he tells me, you know what? I passed the exam and I'm the number one man on the exam. And so it was like, okay, I know what to say to that. Guess what, Chuck? I was number one on the exam. And so at that point, I know I took the wind out of his sails and he sort of walked away. But that just goes to show you that when you're in an environment where people don't necessarily look like you, they don't necessarily know how to interact with you. And some of those interactions are not going to be good ones. And you don't feel like you're welcome here or you're included. Like I said, when I got to the front of the court within a week, I was like, I got to get up out of here. This place is crazy. But I found out that that was not my purpose. My purpose was actually to stay there and try to see if I can make it a better place. And so I took it upon myself to make it my responsibility to see if the friend of the court could become more inclusive. During the time that I've been there, I know that some of the things have improved. So say, for instance, whereas you were a friend of the court attorney, it was like automatically they use that as the pipeline to become friend of the court referees. So when I came in 1997, there was one Black referee. Her name was Adelie Jones. And I believe in 1998, it was that she passed away. And so there was no woman of color, no man of color sitting on that referee bench. And it was in 2009 or 2010 we had one African American female come over in about the early 2000s, and she was a referee from Juvenile who had been co-assigned to us. And then after she left, there was this huge drought, no person of color there. And when Judge Virgil Smith took over in about 2009, he said, you know what? I don't know where you're recruiting or what's going on, but we need to make sure that we have applicants of color, well qualified applicants of color, and we diversify this bench. So it was under his watch that we got the first African American male that I know to have been a friend of the court referee, which is Referee Simpson. And then under um, Judge Colombo, it was Edric Thompson. And then under Judge McCarthy, I think that's when Viola King transferred over from the juvenile division to also become part of the bench. But of course, there's still you got some representation, but you also want to make sure that everybody on the bench is able to work with who's coming through their doors. We've talked about a little earlier at our meeting, who are the people who are coming through the doors?
Lost her, Rita.
Did she freeze?
I think
She's
there's some
frozen.
connection issues.
Okay.
Oh, okay. See if we can get
Well,
her.
anyway, that referee was Harriet.
Okay, I'll tell her to log back in, log out and log back in.
Well, I guess a cup of tea.
Angela, what was that referee's name again?
Harriet Harris.
Which is Esther Harris's aunt.
Oh, is it? Oh, I
She'll
didn't know
come
that.
back.
Yes, ma'am.
All right then.
So I'm following some great footsteps when I get on the bench.
Yeah, I used to sing with her husband. That's wonderful. Okay. That's wonderful. Yeah, I liked Harriet. She was tough.
And so Miss Angela, you knew my whole family before I was even born.
That's right. Because I went to school. I went to school with your mama and your aunt.
Okay.
And for those of you who don't know, Zenell is back.
Yeah.
Okay. Where is she? Oh, there she is.
I had
Okay.
to switch over
There you
to
go again.
my cell phone. So hopefully I'm going to hold it steady for a while. I don't have the phone holder in front of me. So as I was saying is that when you come through the doors, if you're an African-American person, you want to see someone who looks like you. You want to make sure that somebody understands the African-American culture. And like I said, 80% of the people walking through the doors are African-American at the front of the court. So definitely we have to have the conversation about what diversity and inclusion looks like. We also needed to have it, at our attorney level. When I was the front of the court attorney, I was like one of three as far as people of color. Definitely since 2009, we've improved those numbers as well. But you have to have a sensitivity of how diverse your personnel is, especially when you're talking about dealing with family decisions and family law. You want to make sure that the personnel is able to bring their whole self to work, that you're not encountering chucks. And really diversity and inclusion is everybody's responsibility. And definitely nobody is exempt from that. And just as the way that we're wired as human beings, we tend to like our own, and we may actually tend to congregate with people who look like ourselves. We believe and we trust those people. And sometimes even the best intentioned person, like I said, it was my desire to make the front of the court as inclusive as possible. But sometimes even the best intentions, we overlook things. And I also share in the book one of my faux pas, and that was when we were dealing with our Judge from Japan program. First of all, what I wasn't quite comfortable with was calling him the Japanese judge, which had become like the norm. And I was like, well, I don't want anybody to call me the Black friend of the court. And so I had a conversation with one of the Japanese judges about it. He said he felt comfortable with it, but I also feel like, that's something that each Japanese judge may feel differently about. So in my frame of reference, it's called the Judge from Japan. And I also realized that when the Judge from Japan had come, basically I was doing the very ministerial things to make sure that he got to this department, that department, but I wasn't taking the time to really make him feel included and welcome. And so I believe it was about 2015 when we got a judge who usually they would sit down in the general counsel's office, and it was like, no, I don't want the judge sitting down there. They were doing some renovations, and I was like, I don't want the judge sitting down there. I don't want him sitting in a conference room. He needs to be in the office that's next to my office. After all, he's a dignitary, and look how far he's traveled. I owe him that level of respect. And I also owe him the level of getting to know him. Who is he? What does he like to do? And once I was able to take a look at, what I wasn't doing to be inclusive and then to change my behavior, I then developed actual friendships with our last few Japanese judges from Japan, sorry. And we've done lunch. We have gone to various bar association events together. And I really feel like we stay in touch now, even though we don't have a judge from Japan right now. So I really feel that, inclusion in the workplace is really important. In the last part of the book, it really gets to looking at ourselves and having those type of conversations, and having those conversations just like we would have any other conversation, like when we're talking about the sports or the weather. When we get to the point where we can start talking about inclusion to that level, I think that that's when we've actually progressed. For us as African American attorneys, nationwide, there's 1.9 million attorneys. 16% are minorities, 5% basically African American, and like 2% are African American women. So there's definitely a lot that we need to do about representation. But even for that 2% who are actively involved, there still are not enough doors open. There still are not enough inclusionary ways for them to bring their whole skills and talents to the work that they do. Oftentimes we'll find that if somebody needs a mediator or a dispute resolution professional, the name of an African-American person isn't the first one that drops off their lips. Oftentimes the opportunities that we know that are open for others are not readily available or readily shared with people of color or people who are different than the dominant culture. So we definitely have got to do better than that. Some of the things that I think that we can start to look at, number one is, to know our numbers, to look at our organizations. And this is to, a lot of the non-affinity bar associations. Look at your numbers. Who's missing in that numbers? Who's not adequately represented? Even when we're hiring in our hiring process, look at how we're hiring. Who's missing in our applicant pool? And, it doesn't work for you to say that there isn't a qualified a candidate of color. If there isn't a qualified candidate of color, that means probably you're not looking in places where you can find qualified candidates of color. So we've made it definitely a point at the court to make sure that when positions come open, we're not just putting them out to the same old place. We're not hiding it where it's only available like on the website for the state court administrator's office. We're sending it out to the affinity bars. Have conversations with groups that are different than yours. You want to know what's their perspective, what's their experience. I'm looking forward to the conversation our court will be having with the Black Women's Lawyers Association to find out, what's your experience, what's some of the concerns that you may have that we may not be addressing. I also believe that people of color, if we can make an invitation to those who are from a different background, social identity, to come along when we do have events such as this one. I made it a point to blast this event out today to anybody I could think of who I think needed to be part of the conversation for diversity and inclusion. We also need to all make sure that we're in the room to get our education together. The State Bar of Michigan is having the implicit bias training. I think it's the 3 Fridays in December, the first 3 Fridays in December. We need to make sure that we're there, but we also need to make sure that we're inviting others who don't look like us and that they're in the room as well. So often we find that we're preaching to the choir. We need to bring in some new converts so we can start having this serious conversation about diversity and inclusion. The numbers as far as diversity and inclusion, everybody knows the population is becoming more global. Everybody knows that as lawyers, we're supposed to be committed to making sure that we're doing equality and equity in cases, and that we as a profession have that out there. But all of that just ends up being rhetoric until we actually start taking actions. And from my side, I believe that we can start taking those actions if we're people of color, but we're also looking for those who are not of color, who are not women, to start taking actions too, because it's a conversation that we need to have. And I think it's time for us to have that conversation. So I know the Black Women Lawyers Association, we have the SIP event coming up. It's going to be a fantastic event. What makes it even more fantastic is when we share it, and we share it with people who are not usually in our circle. So we want to see what inclusion can really look like. So we can see what networking across racial lines, gender lines, age lines, all of that actually ends up looking like. So that is my book in a nutshell. It is available on Amazon. It's called Coffee and Conversations, Inclusion and Belonging. And it's to get conversation stirred up. So Rita, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Yes, thank you. Let me unmute you. Okay, so now we're going to turn it into more of an interactive segment. First, I'll start off. As I've gotten, a lot of comments and also through observations that Wayne County, when you look at a global perspective in the state of Michigan, Wayne County probably has the, in and of itself, largest amount of African-American attorneys practicing, such as you will never go to another county district where you can hold, you can see as so many African-American attorneys at such as Barristers Ball, where a lot of the attorneys come from the Metro Detroit area, or any just practicing down at the criminal court. Now, in terms of what is your take on, I know there's issues in terms of the bench in the judiciary, but what do you think is causing, ultimately, do you think it's a two-part situation where we need to step forward more and put ourselves out there to bring us more of us in the judiciary? As what overall, my question is, what do you believe is the reason or cause or preimpetus as to why we have so many African-American attorneys practicing in our county, but we don't see the same balanced amount in the judiciary?
I believe one of the members brought it up earlier, is that, do we know what the opportunities are? Do we know the process to get to those seats? And do we have the backing in which to get to those? So if you know that there's something out there that you want an appointment for, make it known that you want that appointment, seek the support and seek the, know the process so you can put your name out there. So I do believe that that's a piece of it. And I also believe that, the other part is that those who make those appointments need to know the numbers just as well as we know the numbers. That, there is no representation on this particular bench as far as diversity. And we need to say, we expect that. And the voters need to know, if it's up on an election issue, who sits on that bench? Does that bench help represent me? And before I cast my vote, those are some things that should be going in my mind. Do they have the same ideology? Do they represent me as far as identity? Those are definitely things that, so I think it's a two-part conversation. We can do more, and they need to know that we're looking for them to do more, those who are in decision-making roles, and have conversations about it, not sweep it under the rug and act like it's not an issue.
Okay.
I have a question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if anyone else has any questions to chime in.
In your role as administrator, has there ever been a training for the judges in regards to actually addressing bias on the bench, systemic racism, implicit bias? Because quite frankly, I've had cases where judges have gotten angry, where I say race is an issue, that my client is not being looked at because of a culture that this judge or referee is not aware of or understands, that my client cannot get an equitable or a fair determination. And is there any classes? Is there any counseling? Is there any openness for the judges to receive that kind of information, not just in the judges' school, but as an ongoing series like we do for the Criminal Bar Association, ongoing series of training classes and information, anything like that?
So the judges, like you said, they do get all introduced to that in judges school. And oftentimes when people hear, the word racist or things like that, the initial response is to react to it, not to be open to hearing it. We, as a court, we've had Kimberly Papillon come in and to offer training, additional training, to have different conversations and to even frame it differently. So that sort of takes the defenses down. And she usually takes it from the neuroscience of decision making. And so the judges are able to see, okay, so I'm wired a certain way just as a human being, that I probably have preferences towards those who look like me. Also, they're introduced to the Harvard implicit assessment test. So they do have the opportunities to take advantage of things like that.
If I could jump in, this is, go ahead, Delisha.
Just to follow up right quick, this is Delisha again. They have opportunities, but is it mandated in any way? Is it, well, if they feel like it, or is this something ongoing? We need you to attend. How up to date are you on information? How specific is it in regards to them actually getting exposed to this information?
So the court rule says so many hours about continuing that, but it doesn't say where your continuing that has to be. And so the judges have that as an opportunity to attend. And we do normal things, regular things, through the court. SCAO does, and the Michigan Judicial Institute does regular things through their organization. But you're right, it is a voluntary, hey, I'm interested in this and I need to, show up for that.
Okay. Attorney McGee?
And just to follow up, the attorneys were also invited to be a part of the implicit bias training at juvenile court, at least. I'm not sure about the criminal or family divisions, and I believe we received credit for it, so it was very well attended. And from what I recall, the judges went in the morning and the attorneys attended in the afternoon. And I learned what I already knew, but I heard what I already knew, but I learned something new in that the trainer threw out different races, and some of you on the call may have been there. She threw out different races, so she would say Asian, and then the audience talked about what her question was, what comes to mind when you think of this race? And she said Asians, and all these different characteristics came out throughout the room. And this was at Cobo, so there were a lot of attorneys in the auditorium. Smart, intelligence, can't drive, but mostly positive comments. What do you think about when you think of white, entitled, wealthy, and all these other positive attributes came out? And when she said, what do you think of when you think of African Americans? Almost all of the comments, at least in my session, were extremely negative. And I didn't realize that the attorneys thought of African Americans in such a negative way. And these were white attorneys and Black attorneys who were throwing out very disparaging descriptions of our culture. And I remember it so well because it was so painful to walk away from that. And it would be good to have a follow-up conversation. Okay, why are we thinking of ourselves like that? And it's scary because that's most of our clients. These are attorneys, these are your clients.
I think one of the reasons we have that thought process is because it's all around us. It's what we see in the media. But we don't stop to, question it and say, well, why did they show that instead of something else? Why do they show the father who's always absent when there's so many fathers who are engaged?
A comment in that regard. I think that two of the things that I think allow people to perpetuate their hateful feelings towards us as Black people is how we identify ourselves. Like, I cringe at the word minority, and I know it doesn't have a proper place in any of these discussions, but when we have programs built and geared towards providing Black people with opportunities, it, I guess, sounds easier for people to accept if we say minority. Also, people of color. It's like, who are we kidding? We know we're talking about Black people, and I prefer to say Black over African American to include Black people from all over the world. So I think that if we began, one, to stop using the derogatory term minority and to use the word Black instead of people of color, especially when we know we're talking about Black people and not non-white people in general, I think that would force the conversation and make people kind of say what they mean more than hiding behind cloaks. I think those are two ways to begin cutting down at the intentional hate.
I would say in response to that, I think that in certain circumstances, you may be absolutely right, but I wouldn't characterize it as a monolith, because sometimes we are talking about people of color, meaning brown people, Black people. Sometimes we are talking about African Americans per se, and then sometimes it is more global. So I don't think that there's one conversation. I think that there's many, and depending on who you're talking with and what the issue at hand is the words that you choose to use at that point in time. And like you said, you may not like the word minority. Other people may embrace the N word in certain circumstances and things like that.
I think we just have to be careful that we don't try to make it a monolith. But I do think any conversation that you can have that moves diversity and inclusion and equity forward is a conversation worth having.
Okay.
Hi, this is Chandrika.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to say that we have conversations all the time about who's missing when we have all these diversity and inclusion trainings, and it's usually the white males who are basically in control right now. And I just thought of something. This would be a great gift because a lot of us have white male, especially white male attorneys that we consider friends and colleagues. This would be a great gift to give to them. Zenell's book.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
and I'm in total agreement with Khadijah regarding the use of the word minority. It just has a deafening effect on me, and I try not to use it. And
Mm-hmm.
so I prefer the term marginalized because I come from a very diverse family, whereas I present as Black, but I have so many other things that come with that. And so I don't want to exclude my entire family, which may not be all what people deem to be Black, but still they're pushed to the edges and marginalized because of their association with Black people or their social status as being very poor. And
Okay.
so I think it's more inclusive and it creates more allies when we do use the term marginalized communities, because a lot of our communities consist of majority Black people, but majority poor people.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my observation. And I
And
just
that's
wanted to
what I said.
say,
Everybody can have a different approach to it, and I think all of them have room for it in the conversation. It's just we need to have the conversations.
Because one
correct.
thing I did take note in your book is how your Coffees and Conversations, Inclusion and Belonging is a guide to getting beyond the racial and economic casteism that has separated humans far too long. I want you to really talk talk about that because I think that's one issue that I personally kind of delve with because I personally, we know the history. We know a lot of this. We have eyes, and that's a big way how people of the majority, they were the majority at that time, and they're becoming the minority at this moment now. But that's how they were able to differentiate us from the others. And then it turned into an economic differentiation and separation between us and them. So I look at it now is that I don't look at any, I personally, I'm sorry, it may be naive, may look naive, but we are all the same. We already know that we have 95% DNA the same. We are all the same. We are just phenotypically different looking. And so how would you really discuss the fact that really we should not be now, even though we have a history of what we've gone through and what we've had to deal with and have had to suffer with, we've had to suffer through, but how is it that you, for your book, can you kind of touch on how we really can start focusing on moving away from that and focusing on loving each other and not always focusing on race as the main issue to separate us?
So I think race may be one of the major issues that separate, but we know that it's a made up issue, that we know that it's a social construct and why it was created. And like you said, and now the demographics are shifting. So if you want to look at race, I think it's 2042. The majority of people are going to be from a non-white race, a minority race. So it's not like we want to shift and say, okay, we still want to look at race and that's going to be the determining factor. But it's like you have to consider this has been the history for so long and it has become embedded in our institutions, the way that we've done business, the way that our institutions and our systems work. So if I can look at it to then undo it, to bring that down, then that gives me the opportunity then to say, okay, we can be inclusive. We can make a court system that does actually have justice for all. We can have a constitution when it says all men are created equal. It means all mankind, not just men. So there's a lot of things. It's going to take a lot of conversations. And I think we can start where we are with who we know that's sitting maybe across the next cubicle or next office who we're not having a conversation with. Let's start having a conversation with that person.
To that point, I think it would be great if we had a conversation with the Women's Law Association and maybe just had a joint meeting, a joint Zoom meeting centered around this subject, and we could start talking about it, the things that make us different and the 95% characteristics of our characteristics are exactly the same, as Rita was saying. And I think your book talks about that. That's the whole point, is that we need to start having the conversations with people who don't necessarily look like us. So in 2021, I'd like to just offer that as a meeting topic, to invite other bar associations to our meeting and we talk about it.
I think that would be great. In 2020, I believe it was in August, we had women from the National Judges Association, Michigan chapter, women lawyers, some women from the Detroit bar, even some women from the Black women lawyers. And we all attended Minta Hart's workshop on her book, The Memo. Excellent book, by the way. And everybody got a chance to participate and use the same dialogue. And we were there as Binda's participants, but one thing that we took away is that we wanted to continue that conversation. So for the Black women lawyers to say, hey, I want to be the ones that spearhead that conversation, I think now's the time, definitely.
This is Chandrika. I just had just being very open. I think the way, if people go back and look at how this election went down and who voted for who, my concern is having these conversations with white women from other organizations and the disingenuousness that I most of the time encounter. So they say one thing, but the polls and the results reflect something different. And my humanity is not up for opinion. And so I really would like to have these conversations, but it really would have to be a conversation where we're actually talking about why you do the things that you do that are against your own best interest and against mine, and get an understanding of that before we move on to inclusion and diversion, because I really don't understand this.
And I think in the conversation that's going to come up. Politically, it looks like this, that, and the other. And, for us as African-American women, there are certain things that politically we're looking for. And if you say your allies or you're committed to inclusion and diversity, it doesn't sort of line up. So I do believe that there's room in the conversation for that as well.
Right, and I know that we did have that event with women lawyers in Michigan I think that was over the summer. So we talked about doing a part 2. So I think that some of the members that have talked, I know Linda probably would want to be a part of the planning committee for that. We said we were going to come back and do a part 2 and 3. We also said that it was important that because when we have these meetings, a lot of times we're talking amongst ourselves, but we want to have some dialogues with the white men, I know, that are in positions of power, so it's not just us talking to ourselves about the power struggle, and that we're actually talking to people in a position of authority to make it go even further than it is. And I agree with Khadijah and Chandrika about the use of the word minority. I was watching the news last night and I saw somebody use the word minority. And in the world, if you look in the global sense, people of color are the majority, so it's, so it's just, when minority, that word means less. And so I tend to lean towards saying Black, African-American, and then we're relevant, people of color, of course, if we're talking about Native Americans or the Latinx community, things of that nature.
Yeah, I think with this issue, I definitely agree with all of the issues that we're dealing with, but I think we also need to acknowledge and also be reminiscent of the fact that we also need to make sure in and of ourselves, even within our race, we're so many different colors, hues from different areas. we as Black people, we're not all technically Black. We come from so many different areas, just as Robin did her ancestry DNA, and she noticed she was from so many different areas. My parents are from Nigeria, and I was born here, and I'm American. So it's so different. But one thing that I think we need to really hone in, especially in our culture, is when you see the numbers rising of a lot of African Americans being killed, shot, assaulted, when you see the numbers, we have to also open our eyes and address is why is a lot of this involving Black on Black. I think in terms of the racial disparities, that probably brings a factor to it, but we need to have a conversation on how can we start bringing our people together to avoid all of these issues that unfortunately involve races that are considered within the one race together. So Zenell, did you want to?
I think you're absolutely on point on that. It's just so many ways that the conversation can branch off. That's why it's called Coffee and Conversations. And because it's going to be layer upon layer, there's going to be things you need to do internally. There's going to be things you need to do with white women. There's going to be things you need to do with white men. And if we're looking at our profession, we still have the majority of the people who are practicing attorneys in the state of Michigan are white and European. They're male. And so, and that most of them where the power and access is are boomers. So you're going to be talking across generational lines, you're going to be talking about racial lines, all of that. There are so many conversations to be had. And there are probably people who feel comfortable or ready and prepared for one conversation, but not another.
Can I just say that there's no such thing as Black on Black crime. It's called crime. So as far as that goes, people who are in proximity to each other usually commit crimes upon each other. That would be across any type of racial lines, demographic, class structure. It's just proximity and where you are. And then there's a bigger issue of how Black people have, as a community, been oppressed in this systematic oppression and laws that have been created to keep us at the bottom. And therefore, that's a totally different conversation, I think, than the inclusion and diversity. I subscribe to the W.E.B. Du Bois philosophy of there's the talented 10th, the 10% of any set of people shall be the ones that lead. And I think in this case, we as lawyers, because we are required to know everything about everything, know a little something about everything, that would be us. And so in this case, with inclusion and diversity, I think the issue, another layer to this conversation is the issue that we as Black women are the driving force, not only behind policies that invoke change, but also in the legal profession when we're just 2% of the entire legal profession. That's another layer of what Zenell was talking about as far as these different conversations that we're going to have. We push the needle, and yet we're only 2% of the entire profession. So these are, I think, this I'm grateful for Zenell and Rita putting this together today so we can pull back some of these layers. And I would love to have another conversation regarding some of the different layers that we should be discussing. And I like the fact that we're discussing these in an open forum where people can have access to it and see how our brains are working and how we're interacting with each other. And I'm just really grateful in this moment. I'm getting a little emotional. I'm really grateful in this moment for having the opportunity to have been exposed to Zenell in my younger years. For those of you who don't know, she's the court administrator, executive administrator now. She's an author now, great mother and wife now. But Zenell's office was forever stacked with books about continuing education. Zenell was forever taking a class on something. And it really inspired me to never to know that you can learn something new every day. And I don't think she knows that, but it was. And I'm just in this moment, I want to just acknowledge her and let her know that all the things that you've done over the years have not gone unnoticed. I noticed them. For every Family Law Institute book you had on your bookshelf that kept coming every year, for every class you went and took, and we were like, where's she at? What's she doing right now? And you were actually off taking a class and learning how to make the course better, because the courts were a mess. And I'm just thankful for you and for this book.
Thank you so much, Chandrika. That means a lot.
Thank you, Chandrika, and thank you for all you do for Black women lawyers as well.
Yes.
And I echo that when Chandrika talks about Zenell. I mean, Zenell tell you, I call her, I text her, email her. She is a wealth of knowledge. If you're just looking for some sage advice about things, Zenell is one of my main go-to people. She'll just say it, she doesn't even have to say a lot. She says a few words, and then I'm like, oh man, and then I'm like, okay, and then I go from there.
Thank you, Robin. Definitely, it's about community, and I think the Black Women Lawyers has one of the most beautiful communities there is. I know, like when I started out at the front of the court, I didn't have this. There wasn't this available, and the opportunity to become involved with the Black Women Lawyers definitely, has helped me as a human, has helped me do more of what I want to do. Because like I said, I don't want to take all this knowledge and just go to the grave with it. Let me pass it on. Let me lift somebody else up. If I got to the table, let me put a chair next to me so you guys can sit with me too.
Yeah, thank you.
So I love you.
Anyone else? Last thoughts? Last comments? Okay. So thank you so much, Zenell. Zenell has been just even when I was at the prosecutor's office, she was at FOC, FNS, Felony Non-Support. I was working with her, and she just helped me through the way, even though we were on technically same but opposite sides. You've been an inspiration, and I'm just happy and so glad that you've been a torchbearer for so many of us that have just been moving forward and need guidance and direction. As you see, all of us here, that's why we want to be here, is to learn more and grow. And we need to converge with ourselves and support ourselves. You're so supportive in the church. We attend church together. She's a deacon with her husband. Please pray for her husband. Please, because he has health challenges. And Zenell is the strongest woman, Black woman, woman of color, not minority, anything, woman of all of us. And we are all strong, and we're all running with the same torch that she is. So yes. I would like to thank you so much for presenting her book is, I've put it on the chat twice. Please purchase her book. It's so helpful. So you can pass on to others, let people know, because this is this is education. We need to break the barriers and not just focus on one thing. We need to really focus on what really is bringing us in a situation we're in, so we can move out of it and move up. So her book puts a lot of interesting information, history, education, everything that you need to know just in that book that I really would encourage you to purchase. So you can also, if you want some of it to go towards the Black Women Lawyers Foundation. If Angela, I'm not sure if your reception is good, but can you explain the Amazon Smile program with the book?
Yeah, with Amazon Smile, if you purchase anything from Amazon, if you go on Amazon Smile, it's just like Amazon Prime, except that they use that particular that web page. You can go on there, put in your favorite charity, and we're asking that you use Black Women Lawyers Foundation of Michigan as your favorite charity. Whatever Amazon collects, they will donate a portion of their proceeds to the foundation.
Okay, thank you.
So Zenell's going to get hers, and you don't have to worry about paying any additional for the book or anything like that. They'll just post, whatever they collect on their part to the foundation, and that's how they give back.
Okay.
Any book, anything else you buy on Amazon, make BWLFM your favorite charity.
Okay, and lastly, pick up a kind of, I guess, tunneling back in with this same topic that definitely is incorporated in her book. We are going to be inviting one of our other members, Erlene Baggett Hayes. I'm not sure if she's still here. She is also authoring a book on implicit bias, and she is planning to also present in the spring. So we want to just make sure we keep this running and this conversation going. So if you have any, ideas to discussion ideas, because we need to talk. This is our format. How many opportunities do we have to really sit down and have this candid of a conversation about these very sensitive issues? Hardly ever. We can't. So we need to be able to have these conversations in this platform. So we're going to have her present in the spring. So if you have any planning ideas, just remember we have our Harriet Tubman event and we have our cocktail sip. Sell those tickets. So with that, I am going to thank everyone for attending and hope you all have a safe week and continued week, and take care of yourselves. Stay with your clients. Just keep to yourself because it's COVID. So, and just stay positive and just let's keep moving forward. Okay, take care.
Thank you, Rita.
Thank you.
Take care. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.
Everybody have a great day.
Great meeting.